Rock and roll.
Yeah, welcome everybody to the Non-Negotiable Show. Our special guest today, Kerry Mansour. And we have another special guest next week, and he's going to join us to the exciting Willem. Welcome, gentlemen. Kerry, I'm sure you got a lot of wonderful things to talk about. However, the world is dying for some input on this situation. We've been talking about respect, how some people do start a conversation with, look, and can I be a straight shooter with you? Can you handle it, or do you want me to sugarcoat it? And we got into a fascinating discussion: is if people are kind of oversensitive, and maybe you have to gauge them before telling them your opinion. And one good example we just witnessed: Will Smith slapping Chris Rock in front of millions. Talk about losing your cool, right?
Yeah.
And you did hear about this, Kerry?
I saw the video that was posted shortly after, and I actually went through that video with my wife and two friends, and I actually broke down what happened. When I say broke down what happened, just looked at what happened, the sequence, because I always look for triggers.
We noticed something in that sequence, and tell me, I didn't. Someone noticed that Will Smith was laughing until he looked at his wife, saw her upset, and decided to maybe this is where we're all like, how do you go from that to who's ever attacked a comedian on stage? This is new. This is history. Like,
it is.
What precedent does that set going forward in live shows and stuff?
Free speech, right?
So it opens.
I admire comedians, and now I'm worried for them.
Well, they will be shot.
Yeah.
Is that going to be the next thing?
Yeah.
Got to watch. You got to be careful what you say.
We've already been experiencing the cancel culture issue with comedians, and the comedians have pushed back decently well about, hey, look, it's comedy, and we should be able to discuss things, and we're going to poke fun at things. But Daniel, you hit the nail on the head. He initially laughed, and it was a genuine laughter, and then he looked at his wife, and I think there's two really key things going on there. Number one, I think when he saw that she was upset, there was an instinctual. He spoke about it later too when he did his acceptance of the award. He talked about protection. And the second thing that was in there was an embarrassment factor, because he laughed too. And that is the key to it. He realized in an instant that his wife was offended and he had been part of it. And there's the thing that happens with kind of it is just a human trait. And why we respect it when somebody goes the opposite way is this: we rarely accept responsibility when we're wrong. When it's an emotional issue, we almost always look to shift blame. It's just a human trait. And that's why when somebody stands up and goes, you know what? I made a mistake. The heavens open up, angels sing, light rays shine down, and people are like, wow, that's cool. In fact, for years, I've been teaching at the college where I'm at for, oh gosh, long time, since '96. And every semester, I always teach my students how to get out of a ticket. If they get pulled over by a cop, how to get out of a ticket. And one of the key components is that they're honest. They admit it and take responsibility. Because if an officer pulls you over and writes you a ticket, that's the equivalent of a spanking. If he gives you a verbal warning, that's a timeout. You were stopped doing whatever you were doing during your normal day. You had to pull over. You had to chat with the officer, and the officer lets you go with a verbal warning or a written warning. They're essentially the same thing. It's a timeout. You're getting a spanking with a ticket, and if you get put in jail, that's like getting the belt. So what's the difference between a verbal warning and a ticket? The officer believes that you're going to change your behavior, because that's the purpose of a spanking or a timeout.
Yeah.
You need to change your behavior. And the only way that you can assure somebody that you're going to change your behavior is if you accept responsibility for your actions, which, interestingly enough, Will Smith did not do at any point. He didn't do it when he looked over at his wife and went, "Oh crap, I was laughing at you, at the joke poking fun of you." And he didn't ever apologize to Chris Rock. And he never said, "I made a mistake." He never truly accepted responsibility for his actions, which actually surprised me given the amount of motivational material that Will Smith has out, and how he talks about life in general and how he looks at it. So just on that one note, but when we look at what happened to him, he went, I teach a lot about executive state and survival state, and those are the only two states that your brain can ever be in. He went from executive state. He was sitting back. You imagine that they've been having a good time. They're sitting back. I believe that they had dinner, and they're being entertained. When you watch the first time that they flash over to him, he's kind of kicked back in the chair. He's not sitting forward all intense. He's relaxed. He's laughing. Those are executive state indicators. And then all of a sudden he was triggered. His amygdala literally hijacked his brain. And when it did, he let it go. And this is one of the interesting things about survival state. So he went from executive state, where he's enjoying laughing, to anger and frustration. And there was some shame in there too. 100% there was shame there. He was experiencing shame because he laughed at his wife, who has a medical condition which has caused her to lose her hair. It's not she didn't shave it like Demi Moore did for G.I. Jane, for a role. She lost it because of a medical condition. And then Chris Rock mocks her in public. And then then Will Smith laughs and looks over his wife and realizes, oh my gosh, this is what just happened. He went into full-blown amygdala hijack.
See, people are defending him and saying that's a good Papa Bear.
No, it's not. He lost control of himself.
And you say triggered, and then you said his brain got hijacked. The way you phrase it, it's almost that saying, even though he's got all this motivational coaching, he's still susceptible to his brain being hijacked by his brain.
His brain is hijacking his brain. Yeah.
How do you
control it? No matter how well you
prevent that? I can imagine you're dealing with cops, and man, I'm sure they get triggered quick on.
It can happen, and that's the very first thing in the training that we cover is, what are your triggers? And you can train yourself to not be as triggered by your triggers. And just like you can train any skill so that it becomes automatic. That's how you prevent that. And so when you recognize your triggers and you're able to go, okay, I know when this person is doing this, that I'm in this place. I'm in this place where I normally get triggered, or I'm already in the middle of being triggered because it happens so quickly sometimes. You have the ability with training to prevent it from getting worse. You have the ability to go, okay, I can switch myself. I'll give you a quick example. Before I was a cop, and before I was a firefighter, I was in the Navy. I was on submarines. And without going into all the details, I was almost killed during a maintenance exercise. I was in a tank that actually causes the submarine to sink, and I was in there by myself. I was doing the beginnings of preparations for the rest of the team to be able to come in and do maintenance in that tank. We were tied up alongside the pier, and the tank began to fill with water very quickly, and I couldn't get out. And I knew that they had the choice to sink a multi-billion-dollar submarine alongside the pier with 16 nuclear weapons on board. Well, actually 156, because each of those 16 missiles has 8 warheads. So 156 nuclear bombs, a bunch of torpedoes, multi-billion-dollar submarine, and 1 sailor. Who loses in that equation? It doesn't take a genius to do that math. Now, spoiler alert, I managed to get out, literally just in time. And since then, I've had a little bit of an issue with confined spaces. And it's actually grown worse the older I get.
I thought you were going to say you experienced a Tory, and it's been great since. I was not expecting it to get worse.
I experienced a lot of different things that day. So what I ran across, I stumbled on it by accident. I was having a claustrophobic attack at 2:30 in the morning. So your amygdala is working 24 hours a day, and it's only making one decision: friend or foe, friend or foe, friend or foe. That's it. 2:30 in the morning, I woke up full-blown claustrophobic attack, and I'm in this relatively small room on a ranch in Hood River, Oregon. And I didn't want to go outside because it was freezing cold outside. And I didn't want to wake my wife up. It's 2:30 in the morning. So I'm laying there. I'm like, all right, I'm in survival state. How do I shift from survival state into executive state? Oh yeah, emotions, happiness, joy, gratitude. Screw that. It's not working. I only tried it for like 5 seconds because I'm like, and then I went, oh, I got to do something different. And I thought of a story that I literally cannot think of without busting out laughing. It's a funny story, something that happened with one of my best friends when he and I were working as partners as patrol officers. And it was such a good story. I told it at my retirement party. And he was, of course, there. And it always makes me laugh. And as soon as I started laughing, like a light switch, because you cannot be in executive state and survival state at the same time. You cannot have fear and anger and frustration and happiness, joy, and gratitude at the same time. Your brain does not allow it. It's one or the other. And sometimes it's like a dimmer switch, or it's a transition, and other times it's like a light switch. Will Smith experienced a light switch. He went boom. What happened with me was a light switch also, except I went with laughter, which took away the anxiety, because you can't be laughing if a lion is chasing you. You also can't be curious. So curiosity, humor, happiness, joy, gratitude, all those wonderful emotions, they will shift you from survival state into executive state, or keep you in executive state if you're starting to slide towards survival state. So if you know that you're starting to get triggered, you can do several things. And this is what we teach officers and school teachers and home health care workers and firefighters and medics. This is what we teach them how to do, is recognize, hey, I'm getting triggered here. How do I shift back? And it might not be appropriate to laugh in this situation, but it's probably very appropriate to become curious.
Reverse psychology.
It is totally. It's totally, and it's opposites. You're working with opposites. And so like in sales, are you being triggered because a client has an objection? Are you in a negotiation and you're being triggered because they're coming up? Maybe they're an assertive negotiator and they're hitting you hard. They're trying to bully you over, and you're starting to get knocked back on your heels, and you're starting to get upset with them. And you realize, hey, I'm getting triggered. How do you stay in executive state so you can be the best problem solver, so you can think clearly, so you don't get trapped and do something dumb that's going to blow. Appreciation. Willem, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I want to comment on that. And I hear what you say about triggers, and I fully agree with you. You know, that we need to be aware of that. And for the most part, I'm aware of my triggers. And the best way to describe that awareness of my triggers is they're behind locked doors. But I found I might have very strong locks on those, like a rebar shoved between the handles of the door. But I found as I'm getting tired, this has been a long day. I had other emotional influences, things not going well. That rebar is turning into a little toothpick.
Yeah, my
And
wife
that
told me
trigger wants to come out. That
past
guy wants
7
to go like,
p.m. I'm not graceful.
yeah, let me at him. And I've had that, you know,
Wow.
last night I had something and I just toothpick. I went there. And how do you maintain that executive center and the awareness of your triggers in moments of extreme weakness, from tiredness, exhaustion, many other things that go? How would you advise me on that?
That's such. First of all, thanks for being so vulnerable and so honest.
Thank you.
Because everybody's one point or another experiences that at different times at different intensity levels. So thank you for bringing that up, because that's a really valid question. And the first thing I'll say is, look, we're human.
Okay.
You know, there's things that my wife is like, hey, did you get that thing done? I'm like, hey, babe, I am but a mere mortal man. No, I didn't get to it, or I forgot. Didn't mean to, but I did. And so, you know, sometimes we have to recognize, look, we're human and we're going to slip sometimes. At the same time, like right now, Daniel, it's 9:30 at night for you. Coming up on 10 o'clock at night. It's been a long day for all four of us, and just knowing, yeah, I'm starting to feel tired. I'm starting to feel edgy. And if you can go curious, if I meant to grab them, but over here on the side, I carry a stuffed Curious George doll around with me to all my trains. If you can imagine, I got to show you. Give me 1 second here. Give me 1 second.
That's what we say in our sessions. Don't get furious, get curious.
Yeah, I brought him in, didn't I?
That is a good line. That should be on a bumper sticker. Don't get furious, get curious.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. Show
Well,
my
you came
imagine
up
this.
with that, Daniel. So print T-shirts for your workshops.
No, I stole it from someone. Somebody said it.
Good thievery. Sorry.
That's great thievery. So, if you can imagine this guy on stage with me at, you know, teaching cops de-escalation, and they're like, "Yeah, you a pedophile carrying around a little stuffed animal?"
What's
But
with
yeah,
this monkey business?
there you go. That's a good one too. If you stay curious, you can't get angry. Again, you can't be curious if a lion is chasing you. You're not going to be going, gee, I wonder if he ate today. I wonder what his top land speed is. No, you're in fight or flight or freeze.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's one way. That's one way.
Very quick questions about Will Smith, actually, and how it's related to what you were saying about Curious George. So it seems to me there is a levels of this. So there is kind of levels of power and levels of force. When you're waking up, you have all this space for the day, you're planning, you're in executive function, so you have a lot of power, right? Mental power, mental capacity. As it's diminishing, you're turning into force. So at the end of the day, it's becoming force. Force is reactive in nature. So when, for example, coming back to Will Smith, so he's in curious state of mind, he's listening to the comedian doing his bit, he's laughing, but then it's the end of the day, they're dealing with sickness and disease, with misery, shame, guilt, and so on. So he's in this curious state of mind, but the level of this curiosity is just so small, so tiny, that when he hears the joke, he laughs at it because he's still in the space. And he turns to his wives, he feels the misery, he feels the guilt and shame. And because the levels of stress in their family and the environment is quite high, I suppose, so curiosity goes out of the way and reaction kicks in and he just goes there. That's it. So, I suppose it's very similar with law enforcement agencies. It's like you can become curious if you have enough mental power to shift the focus from being furious to curious. But sometimes when there are so many, triggers in the environment, and wife could be the biggest trigger there is, right? And she's going through these motions, she's going through the sickness and disease. So that's not only for the wife, it's for the whole family. And now the attention is brought to this disease, right? To this pain, right? And it triggers, it explodes. He laughs, he looks at her, he sees her pain, and that's it. There is nothing else. It's just pain, pain, pain. And what people in pain want to do, they want to cause more pain.
Hurt people.
So he wanted Chris Rock to feel it. That's why he went there and slapped him. Motivational stuff and whatever he's doing outside of these things, I think it's very irrelevant, because when he's pumping out the motivational content, he is an executive function, right? This is the highest echelon of executive function. You have to organize your thoughts, you have to rationalize it, be very eloquent putting it out there so it resonates with other people. But then, as you say, there is survival and there is executive function. So in this case scenario, we just saw survival, primal instinct kicking in, and he wanted the other person to feel the pain. And by extension, he wanted everyone in this, who was listening and seeing it, to feel his pain. So this is something that this kind of Curious George is an incredible concept, and curiosity is absolutely essential in whatever you're doing. That should be a default, because that's how we're born as kids, right? You're becoming naturally curious. Curious state of mind introduces joy into your system. Joy kicks out all the hormones, like we like to cover this in our training session, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphin. So you have this cocktail floating in your body. You're learning, you're grasping information to the maximum of your capacity. But then if your stress levels are high, you're gonna fall back into survival mechanism extremely fast.
Can I share my screen for a sec?
Oh yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No. Share your screen, and then I want to ask you a perspective, something I saw last week, and I would like to get your angle on that.
Okay. So this is just a slide from one of the PowerPoints, and there's a lot going on here. But on the left-hand side, that's survival state. And I equate it to a dope house, and dope and being an drug house. And that's where Amy, the amygdala, is sending all the information that's coming into the hindbrain. And you've got drama, depressed, overwhelmed, offended, pessimistic, provoked, ego, enraged. Oh, gee, ego and enraged. That describes exactly what went on with Will Smith last night.
Oh,
so
describing U.S. prison.
Well, there's that
prison
too.
Shows. Yeah, you got nothing else but your ego.
Which, by the way, we can circle back around to prisons, because there's an awesome program I want to tell you about. But that's later if we have time. So on the right hand side is the executive state. It's your prefrontal cortex, your PFC, and exactly what you just said. There's your dose chemicals, your dopamine, your oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins. And we actually teach people how to produce each of those, especially the school teachers, because that affects how kids learn. You got to get, I just had this teacher has been teaching for over 20 years. Just like 5 days ago, I had him in a training. This was second of 4 trainings. And we were going, it was at the beginning of training, we were going over recap of what we had done the first day. Only had 90 minutes with him in each block of these 4. And his takeaway was, and I'm quoting, his takeaway was, and by the way, he's the only history teacher for all the 6th graders in the entire school. He said, I realized that I can't, when the kids come in the classroom, tell them to sit down, shut up, and get out their books and expect them to learn. I need to open up their brains first. And I'm like, yes, what an amazing awareness for this teacher who's been going over 20 years to be able to have. That's who I want in the classroom. I want a teacher who knows that and who is willing to admit it in front of 35 other teachers to say, I just realized this 2 weeks ago. And I haven't been thinking of anything else since in the last 2 weeks except that. So we teach the teachers especially how to generate dose chemicals in the kids' brains to enhance their ability to learn, because that literally changes their future capacity. And that's pretty cool stuff. So this diagram is just real quick. You got a T intersection. All the information's coming into Amy, and Amy's directing 80% of it to the hindbrain, 80% of the time. The surface area on the amygdala for negative thoughts is 4 times as large as the surface area for the positive thoughts. So we spend about 70 to 80% of our time, of our life, in survival state. We're only in executive state for 20, maybe 30% if we're really lucky of our life. And when you think about what's been going on over the last 2 years during the pandemic with the shutdowns and the stripping away of rights and the mandates that have gone on, people are more on edge than ever before.
And now with gas prices and a war, geez.
Yes, we just added to it. Just added to it.
Speaking of adding, what was your situation last week, Willem?
Say again.
You said you had a situation last week.
Okay, so it's nice that we talk about all these, being an executive center and everything else, but I want to call incongruency. And last week I attended. It was a training course, 5 days long, on how to build teams, successful teams, and so it has a strong leadership component in it. And what surprised me, even on day 5, when I mentioned, but how can you have a strong code of honor for your team if you don't have a strong internal code of honor that you stick to? And what I found is a lot of people negate themselves, try to avoid seeing themselves. And what you talk about, Kerry, is it's a tool that I apply, and it's not about using, it's about being. That's what I see. And how can I de-escalate the situation if I can't de-escalate my own internal struggles? Look at the self-talk that we have. I looked at my journaling back 3 years ago. Good God, I was abusive. I wasn't nice to myself. But and how do you, Daniel, do an accusation audit on yourself? And those accusation audits can take many things, because we try to convince and negotiate ourselves into very, very bad situations. I deserve this beer. I deserve the 3rd beer. Let's have that. So, Kerry, my question to you, actually, with that long setup, is what's the role of self-knowledge and self-control, not in the sense of externally, but internally, when it comes to de-escalation?
That's a great tee up. And before we go there, I just want to say I heard a quote. I can't remember exactly. I think it's been said many different ways, but you would immediately terminate a friendship if that friend ever said some of the things to you that you say to yourself.
Yeah, I've heard.
Yeah,
I think that's where that phrase comes from. Hey, I'm dead inside.
Well, some people certainly feel that way.
Yeah.
So there's about, when we look at, and this is research based, I'm not just pulling these numbers out of my head, about 50% of the public is what we would call dandelions. And dandelions are very resilient. They grow anywhere. They grow in a crack of a sidewalk. They grow on a mountainside. They grow. About 50% of the public are super resilient. They just chug along. They get hit. They get knocked back on their heels, and they just go right back to work. They're going to work every day. They're raising their 2.5 kids because one of them's a short person. They're dealing with everything. That was a joke there, but they're dealing with everything. And they're pretty darn resilient. They have what's called a low nervous system reactivity. About 25% of the public are orchids. Now, if you've ever tried to grow or maintain an orchid, I have. I'm a serial killer of orchids. Costco has these sales every year on orchids, and I always get them because I know I don't want to pay that much because I'm going to kill the freaking thing. I cannot make an orchid live more than about 89 days. I don't think I've ever made it 90 with an orchid. And about 25% of the public can go either way, dandelion or orchid. So the orchids have a very high nervous system reactivity. They get set off. I know this lady, she called me up about 2 weeks ago. She had been pulled over by a police officer. Afterwards, she was just bawling her eyes out. She got a fix-it ticket. That means it doesn't go on her driving record. It doesn't affect her insurance rates, but she was just really having a hard time. But here's the thing. You take an orchid and you give it the love and the care and the support that it needs, and it becomes something just amazing. And that's what we're working with the school teachers, letting them realize they're kids that are super reactive, the problem ones. They have so much potential to do amazing things. They just need to be cared for a little bit differently than you do a dandelion. And then about 25% of the public can go either way between dandelion and orchids on any given day. So when we talk about this self-talk, Willem, that you brought up, and you asked that question so well, there's about half of the population that their level of self-talk isn't that bad. And they just keep chugging along because they're really resilient. About half of the public, they have that self-talk going on. And yes, if you are in survival state, you notice it immediately because you have that drama, you have that depressed, that offended fear, anger, frustration going on. And so your thoughts are naturally going to be inherently negative because about 90% of our thoughts are repetitive. So if we're thinking 80% negative thoughts to begin with, and then 90% of our thoughts are repetitive, we're just recycling these negative thoughts. And that's where that self-talk comes from. And that's why it's really hard for some leaders, because they have that, they've created a situation because of being constantly and chronically in survival state. They've created a situation where they have incredibly low self-esteem. And so they're micromanagers and they refuse to share information. And they have all these other aspects of a poor leader. And it comes from the low self-esteem. And low self-esteem came from constantly being in survival state. And you see the leaders that are just, they do a great job. Bet you if you looked at them, they're in executive state a lot, and they've built that high self-esteem because they've been in executive state and they understand the positive emotions and they live that. So the question becomes, if you recognize that you're hanging out in the survival state, you're hanging out at the dope house, how do you get across the street to the safe house where you're going to have your dopamine, your oxytocin, your serotonin, and your endorphins? That takes effort. Not a lot, but it takes effort. How's that? Does that help answer that amazing question you asked?
No, absolutely, because I think it's just what we need to reiterate is the relationship with self and the responsibility for self. I always tell people, I can easily just fire up an email to any three of you and I can block out 1 hour of your time. Boom, I just did it. But try to schedule an hour with yourself. No, I have this, I don't have time or anything else. And it's always like that one. So I always advise people, fill your calendar with yourself. And I'm like, well, this is weird. But, if you don't have that internal relationship, you don't have that internal control. And that's where everything stems from.
So my Buddhist
So well
coach would
said.
say, if you can't
Thank
carve
you.
out 5 minutes to meditate, you need to carve out 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Things are bad at that point. And Carrie, I always like to ask this to everybody, full disclosure. thought Eugene knows this about me, so I thought it won't be a surprise. And he's probably like, God damn it, Dan, you got to bring it up every time. When you said the dope house, I was hanging out there, but I had a lot of marijuana, a lot of dope. And I thought, you know what, that'll chill me out because, yeah, I think I was in the Marine Corps, that's always, right? So I'm like, it's time to take a chill. I'm in college. I'm in communications. I'm in liberal arts. But that isn't really much of a solution. And, Eugene got me, bless his soul, into EFT and I got meditation. That helped. But something that Willem said earlier, no, that you said, Carrie, that really the question was, what do you do? Like, do you give yourself an AA? Do you give yourself a label? What I've been finding for me is I ask myself no-oriented questions. I think the biggest one was from a participant who said, would you want your daughter smoking marijuana? I said, no. I'm protect anybody who tries to get her to smoke. No way. I don't want her near it. And I said, is someone protecting me? Yeah, me. I gotta. So it's like, yeah, Willem, you got to carry your own cross, man. You got to sit with your thoughts and get from the dope house over to the prefrontal. Any shortcuts, Carrie? Any tips for our viewers? Because marijuana ain't the answer.
Well, in part of the problem with cannabinoids is they actually, if you're talking occasional, it's not going to happen. But with any kind of regular use, it actually
5 years.
Yeah, it ends up creating paranoia, which is paranoia by definition is a survival state emotion.
It's becoming legal here, and it's becoming really big, real big.
It's it's going to be legal everywhere before long, and it just and I'm certainly not going to tell anyone don't smoke marijuana or don't drink alcohol, or you're going to make the choices you're going to make. But in the end, I would hope that the choice is, why am I doing it this time? And ultimately, as far as if you're going to be shifting, if you have to resort to a substance to make yourself feel better, then my recommendation would be look at the dose chemicals to make yourself feel better. Do it naturally. The body has the ability to heal itself and make itself feel better 100%. So what are you putting in your body? And I'm not talking drugs. I'm just talking food right now. What are you putting in or not putting in that's going to stimulate good health? And then your dopamine. Go play with a puppy. Go down to the animal shelter. I'm not saying get a puppy. Don't get a cat. Don't get a dog if you're not taking care of yourself. Go down to the animal shelter and play with a puppy. That's a huge dose of dopamine and serotonin. Exercise for the endorphins. Oxytocin. Figuring out, even if it's over Zoom, you can still bond with people. Oxytocin is the bonding chemical. And I'm not saying, hey, you have to install an app on your phone that's a dating app and go have a hookup to get bonding. You can if you want to, but what are you putting into your body or on your body? Is there something that you could do naturally, and have you tried that route first? That'd be the only recommendations I'd have for people.
Can I speak to that a little bit and kind of tie it up the internal dialogue? So I think that internal dialogue is actually a part of a survival mechanism. It's kind of a justification of the things that you're going through, justification, rationalizations, and normally the negative self-talk is fueled by those survival mechanisms. So it could be just a simple overwhelm, and that's what you experience. The state of overwhelm comes up, in the mind as a thought pattern. So when we say like 90% of thoughts are negative, that's because you're still 70 to 80%, whatever the accurate numbers are, you're still being in the survival state of mind. Now, if you're in a positive, grateful, joyful state of mind, there is no internal dialogue. You don't have time. Just being present, you experience the moment, you experience, your counterpart, experience the environment. And when it comes to, for example, marijuana, like it does produce the release because it reduces the inflammation. So overwhelm a little bit goes out of the window. So you feel this sense of relief. But then if you overdo it, it becomes a sense of overwhelm again, because the default behavioral patterns always kick in, and you're always gonna, if you in 90% on in negative self-talk, it's gonna come out. And because marijuana kind of introduces endocannabinoids in your systems, anandamides, I think that was the chemicals. So it kind of speed up these processes. And what happens is that, first of all, you have the sense of release, but then it kicks back in, and it only exaggerates the survival mechanisms. It only exaggerates the states of overwhelm, anxiety, and that's why it's not a solution. But then again, if you're talking about food, coffee, for example, coffee is huge, and we all addicted to coffee. I mean, I'm talking to majority of people, but coffee actually introduces anxiety and overwhelm in the system too, to the great degree, and we don't even realize it, because in order for you to completely feel yourself free of coffee, you have to eliminate it for a week, start it again, drop it for a week, do it 3-4 times, and then you have this comparison window where you can kind of relate to what's happening in your systems. But coffee is actually, and Kerry, maybe you can speak to that a little bit more, like especially talking about like police force, law enforcement. How do you feel like this day-to-day substances like coffee, tea, pretty much anything, cigarettes, influences the de-escalation or escalation processes of the survival mechanisms?
Yeah, it's a great question. I worked graveyard shift or late shift a good portion of my career. I did 30 years in law enforcement. And for a long time, my standard thing was at least 2 coffees a night. And when I talk a coffee, I'm talking venti, Starbucks, caramel macchiato. I would tell the barista add at least 1 extra shot. Sometimes if I was feeling tired, 2. And by the way, when you are squeezing that caramel bottle, when your hand cramps, you're halfway there. And that was my standard order. Twice a night. I would go to the airport, Lindbergh Field in San Diego, because they had a 24-hour Starbucks. It was at the time the only 24-hour Starbucks. So now we start introducing this, and we're blowing out our adrenal glands. We're just destroying them. And your body's just trying to compensate for all this stuff. And yes, that figures into your triggers, and it figures into how well are you going to be able to de-escalate someone, because you're throwing yourself into survival state with the substances that you're putting into your body. It is a huge problem. What's the answer for that? Well, again, it comes back to what are you putting into your body or on your body that can't be naturally taken care of? Why are you making the choices that you're making? Daniel, you mentioned earlier, I deserve this 3rd beer. Sometimes we think that way. And so, Eugene, the only other thing I want to say is on the self-talk, I think sometimes when we're in executive state, sometimes we'll have some self-talk that's positive. If you're practicing gratitude. And in fact, one of the things I'm going to be doing in late April, is starting a 30-day gratitude challenge specifically geared toward teachers and law enforcement officers. Because gratitude is one of the best ways to get out of survival state into executive state and stay in executive state. Gratitude is incredibly powerful. The only thing is, one of the only things that's more powerful is humor, laughter. So when we think about self-talk,
you're Chris Rock.
Well, Chris Rock was in the executive state until he made a joke. And again, there's this. I'm gonna digress just for a moment, because I'm glad you made that joke, Daniel, because there was something that I wanted to make a point of. and this works for accusation assessments. I call them accusation assessments, not audits. Accusation audits, accusation assessments, whatever term you want to use. It works for labeling. Both of these very, very well. There's a restaurant chain called Claim Jumper. It's mainly in the Western states. It's like a 1849 gold miner, prospector, mining company kind of theme restaurant. And they have this cake, a dessert. It's called the Motherlode cake, and it fills an entire plate. It's huge. It's chocolate cake and chocolate icing, 7 layers of icing cake, icing cake, icing cake. It's an amazing dessert, sends you straight into diabetic coma. But emotions are like that. Very rarely do you have just one emotion or 2 emotions, which is why on an accusation audit, you're like, up, you're hitting different things. When you're labeling, you should be labeling different emotions. Because it's layer after layer after layer after layer. But here's the thing, the base layer, if you're in conflict, the base layer,
Disrespect.
It's fear.
Oh.
Fear is the root of all conflict. Now, disrespect comes above fear simply because what do you fear when you're disrespected?
Judgment, maybe.
Lots of things. Yeah, lots of things. That's one of them.
Right.
You've loss of money in the future, reputation, meaning your ability to get a job that you want, the mate that you want to keep. There's lots of fears underneath disrespect. So if you're in conflict with somebody, always look for the fear. When you look for the fear, number one, you're staying curious, which means you're staying in an executive state. Number two, when you look for the fear and you start labeling that fear, the person gives you as the guy that we all, I think, all look up to, Chris Voss, goes, that's right. You know, that's what you're looking for. A head nod is nice, but that's right. That's what you're looking for, and you'll know you'll hit it. And if you're in conflict, when you start looking for the fears and labeling the fears, that's when you're going to have a real connection with somebody. That's your tactical empathy.
I want to make a quick comment on humor. As you said, humor gets you out of that. There's a joke that I tell myself every day, and it's a strange joke considering I live in a continent that never has snow. So what does the one snowman say to the other one? He's like, you also smell carrots. And I found it doesn't matter what situation you're in, you tell yourself that, yeah, I'm smelling carrots. I start laughing. It's a quick way. So maybe you can tell people, if you're getting angry, ask yourself, am I smelling carrots?
That's good. I like that.
I came on here with I wanted to come in here with the intent of triggering Carrie. Well, I didn't try triggering him last time. I was just angry that the YouTube videos weren't getting millions of views, and Carrie diffused it. And he was like, you know what, you're doing videos. That's great. And so I'm like, there's got to be. So I was going to bring a box of donuts and say, hey, Carrie, would you like some donuts? Oink, oink. But I'm like, no, that's cheap. Too early. I'll wait towards the end when some report is built. I don't have the donuts, but while we were talking, I thought maybe this will trigger you, if you don't mind. Hurt people, then they become cops with a badge of power. You ever heard of that? Like, it's always a joke, like, oh, cops, you know, they were all just bullied and now they have a badge. So yeah, they're power tripping. Do you power trip, Carrie?
I'm so angry at you for saying that right now.
Expose the industry.
You know, here's the reality. Most people are bullied growing up to some degree. So if we're going to
I used to be bullied, and I did bully someone, but I got caught and I got put in my place, and I'm like, man, how come when I was bullied, no one got put in their place? That's not fair.
That's funny. You know, it's funny you mentioned that, because I actually worked for a guy, and his name was Andy. And when Andy came to traffic division where I worked, I was a collision reconstructionist for a number of years. So we put the pieces back together after a serious injury or fatal traffic collision, DUI related collisions. We handled the worst of the worst. And when he first came, his joke was, I always thought the traffic officers, because within traffic division is also the motorcycle officers who write boatloads of tickets. He said, I always thought that traffic cops were shoved into a trash can upside down when they're in school, and that's why they became traffic cops later, because they just like taking it out on people. Now, this is a lieutenant on the police department saying this about other cops. So the reality is this. Yes, hurt people sometimes do hurt people. And you know what's interesting is sometimes hurt people step up to save other people from being hurt. So it can go both ways. And if we're going to look at law enforcement and say, hey, we need to make some changes, which I think we do. One of them is the training that I give, because nobody else is doing the training that I am the way that I am. There's some people touching on neuroscience, but they're not breaking it down the way that we even have it just in this podcast. So we do need to make some changes in law enforcement. We also need to make some changes in teachers, those are the two main sectors that I've stepped up to serve, because I see the need there. And can we make changes while continuing to actively recruit really amazing people? And the reality is we still hire from the human race. That's why you'll have a doctor that rapes or kills somebody. You'll have a Vons or a grocery store cashier that robs and hurts people. It happens from all walks of life. If you ever watch any of those
show Snapped,
Snapped, or if you look at who gets arrested during a prostitution sting, there's always a school teacher, there's always a religious person, there's always some doctor, because some things are just universal. And anytime you hire from the human race for any occupation, you're going to have some problems. But the challenge is, how can we take strides to give the people who are in power, like doctors, like school teachers, like police officers, the screening necessary to try and keep the bad apples out. And that's actively being done, and I think you're going to see that continue to ramp up. But how do we take care of ourselves, just on like a day-to-day basis? The average person walking down the street, how can we not have that negative self-talk?
But here's the scary part: is one of the reasons I got out of the military is you make one wrong move, not only do you cost other people's lives, but you can go to that brig really quick in a jiffy. And yeah, as a civilian, you're saying, Eugene might, who knows, pick up a prostitute later and it's a sting and gets in jail. And look at Eugene. He'll probably get beat up. I mean, I picture Eugene on the opposite end of, I'd probably within the first day. I mean, you wanted to talk about, you said something interesting about prison, dope house, ego. I mean, that place is, from all the shows I've seen, is this guy is he gonna give me donuts and help me? Or is this guy gonna kill me? And I can't imagine living day to day with that. For one bad day I had where I decided to, I mean, let's say Chris Rock did pull charges on Will Smith, which he didn't. This is where I'm going with it. But let's say Chris Rock said, you know what? I can't encourage this. He shouldn't got to the war. He should have been straight to jail. I was disrespected in front of everybody. Will Smith gets sent to jail. Like, that is the worst place on earth. It has to be. Carrie, you've probably been in one of those places. I can't even imagine the feel of that. Your amygdala just constantly running. And then here's the problem I got is, when they get out, I seen where they're in solitary confinement, don't talk to people, 2 years, 3 years, and they let them out the next day. They're at a grocery store. Someone looks at them the wrong way. Their ego goes bonkers, and now they're back in the system.
So the going back, being sent back after you've been released, is called recidivism. The average recidivism rate in the United States after 5 years is 74%.
Gosh.
It's a pretty high number, right? So there's this program called Prisons of Peace, and it was started by a lawyer, 2 lawyers who are mediation lawyers. They work with conflict resolution, and they created this training program, which, interestingly enough, it's like parallel to ours in the sense that they use a couple of the tools that we teach also. They don't use all of our tools. They just use like 2 of them. They've had over 1,200 people that have gone through their training program released. So by numbers alone, if we drop that number down to 1,000, just to make the math easy, 740 should have been sent back to prison. So if we said it was an amazing program, I don't know, I'll ask you guys, what would that number be? What would the recidivism rate be for that program to be labeled amazing? How many people would go back? Not certainly 740, because that would make it just no special. What would make this an amazing program to you?
20%.
Under 20, you said, Eugene? I think
20.
under 20.
80-20, so 20%.
20.
20%. Willem, your thoughts?
I would go for 20% because I'm trying to launch projects in recidivism.
Okay. So
Yeah.
Daniel, you said around 20% also?
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. So 200 people out of 1,000. If 200 people got sent back, that'd be an amazing program. 0. None. Not one of their graduates has ever gone back to prison. That's just 2 of the tools that we teach. We teach more than that.
Wow.
So this Prisons of Peace program is an amazing program. They've had amazing success. To have a 0 recidivism rate, it's just freaking phenomenal, right? But see, here's the issue, and that's why I'm bringing this up. That's possibility. See, when we take those tools and more into the classroom for children, if we can do this, and by the way, these prisons that they went into, they weren't honor camps. They were maximum security prisons. Those were the only prisons that they operated in, that they trained in, maximum security prisons. So to have 0% recidivism out of maximum security prisons, it's unheard of. But now we're talking about being able to change people. Well, I mean, you had asked questions earlier about, or I'm sorry, maybe it was Eugene, about the self-talk. Eugene, you were talking about self-talk. How do we get past this point? Well, we can. There's tools available. And if we can take a hardcore parolee convict who is now a parolee and have them not repeat the same mistakes that got them sent to prison, when 74% of everybody else does, that's hope for our future as a country, as a world.
I think this is a beautiful way to finish this conversation today. Amazing insights from Carrie, William, Daniel, for myself. So thank you so much for kind of indulging us in this conversation and spreading the love, really, because like Carrie mentioned, survival or executive function. So there is fear and love, and if you're not moving towards love, you're moving towards fear. So I think today's message was beautifully put in a way that let's move towards love, towards peace, whether it's a prison, whether it's the day-to-day triggers. There are tools available for anyone to use. And, we have amazing team here, amazing people in the community, negotiation practice community, and just in general, bunch of really cool dudes, right? Who are actually striving to make a difference in the world, whether it's in law enforcement, educational system, whether it's entrepreneurship. And we're going to have William next week on the podcast, whether it's in real estate. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thanks for the conversation. I love how the 3 of you, Daniel, Eugene, Willem, I love how your minds work. I love how deeply you think. You don't take stuff at a surface level, and I really respect that.
Yeah, I really love when you do the validation. I'm still high on the last one we did, where I'm like, I'm gonna keep doing YouTube. I'm gonna keep doing YouTube videos. Yeah, why am I getting hung up on views? No, that's real behavioral change. I felt it personally. Excited to have you up here. And Willem, yeah, he's our guest next week. And yeah, I'm gonna can I bring Douglas? He's old school. He likes the pitch decks and stuff, and see if we can talk him out of that. And Carrie, is there any way viewers can reach you, and can you do anything for them, or are you just exclusive to working with school teachers and police?
No, we will work with anybody, and we just focus on the people that are really out there to make a difference in this world specifically. But we'll work with anybody. We have an amazing, patting myself on the back, but an amazing relationships transformation course that people can go through, and there's tons of material that we're posting currently and going to be moving forward in the future. So you can sign up for our newsletter. So the International De-Escalation Association. It's a real simple website address. It's the idea, like that's a great idea, .world. So theidea.world. And you can find resources there. And if you don't find the resources that you need, check back in a week, because there's literally changes we're making on almost a daily basis.
Perfect. And all the links and contact information about Carrie and the things that he does will be in the video description below for the viewers.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, gentlemen.